I am joined today by Luigi Guarnuccio, who is part of that indie studio, and we're going to be talking about The Last Hex, which is coming out on early access on Steam on May 10th. Luigi, thank you for taking some time to talk with us and share a little bit of insight into The Last Hex.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's nice to meet you guys again after was it Play NYC last year?
Play NYC last year was
So
when we
yeah,
first ran into The Last Hex, and it really captured my attention. This is a game I'm very eagerly awaiting putting some more time into, which I think will become evident with some of the questions I want to ask you. But before we get going too much further, for people that haven't heard of this game, why don't you give us the pitch? What is it? Why should people be excited?
yeah. So the Last Hex is we call it a deck building RPG with some roguelike elements. So we have the standard deck building where you're using a deck of cards to fight enemies, but kind of our spin on it is the RPG elements to it.
Hmm.
So with the RPG elements, we have equipment. Equipment, you only have 7 slots that you can fill, so you're constantly adding and removing equipment that'll give you like special powers, but also raise your stats. Stats are important because each card has a certain stat associated with it, and your cards will get better and better and better with the more stats that you have. So we don't have a cap on how good a card is. It just depends on how you end up building your deck of cards, but also building out your set of armor. But then along with the RPG elements, we have events, kind of choose your own adventure type scenarios. They
Mm-hmm.
can be really good for you, they can be really bad for you, but they're kind of set outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
So you can kind of like learn the system, which kind of goes back into the roguelike side of things. Where roguelikes, there's a lot of patterns. Like every enemy has its own deck. You kind of learn that deck. Each event has its own set of outcomes. We have the permadeath. You start over, picking a new class. And then yeah, there's a lot of unlockables throughout the game that you'll just. So technically, the game's the easiest when you first get it, and the more you play it, it just ends up getting harder and harder and harder.
That's a great overview. This is a really elegant system for a game. I want to stress that I think that all these different mechanics work superbly well together. It's really a great balance that you guys have created. Um, I have to ask though, what's the inspiration? It seems like a really sensible uh, kind of mixture of mechanics, but one that I haven't seen necessarily a lot. So
Mhm.
how did the idea come about?
Yeah, so a lot of people will probably look at it and say, obviously you get a bunch of Slays of Spire. Which
Mm,
yes, we have a lot of Slay the Spire in the game,
mm-hmm,
but we actually take most of our inspiration from games like Binding of Isaac,
mm-hmm,
FTL, Darkest Dungeon. But even going beyond that, we take a lot of our inspiration from board games, really.
mm,
Uh, Dominion, original, a kind of a start to deck building. We got like Catan with the hexes. We got like the game Talisman, which kind of throws in like an event system for a board
absolutely.
game. But then like D&D, where it's your stats kind of end up being how good you are in combat. So the more stats you have, the better your attacks are going to be. The better you're going to be able at certain things. So a lot of our inspiration kind of comes from that side of things. Taking those because we like board games. All of us
Mm,
on the team just love board games, and we play a lot of D&D. We play a lot of variances of it, and we really like the stats. I mean, stats are fun.
yeah.
I count stats. I min max all my characters. Um, so we want to somehow bring that into a card game, and it just doesn't make sense from a physical, like a board game type standpoint, to always have to do the math and change the cards. Where we have computers who can do the math for us.
Hey, very,
Um,
very
so
good.
that's so that's kind of why we went down that path of using stats in a card game.
That makes a lot of sense. It's very clear once you start playing, you can see all these different little board game elements. It's a very clear inspiration for what you've built. Um, I've talked to a number of different developers that have created roguelikes, and I think it's always something I like to ask about, like specifically designing around a roguelike, because on one hand, it seems like such a boon to development to basically create a system, not a series of levels or a series of encounters. Essentially, a system that creates those for you, so you can infinitely kind of churn
Yeah.
those out. But at the same time, I have to imagine that that system can sometimes be problematic. So were there any kind of like hurdles that you encountered in setting up this roguelike system? You know, any unique hurdles that you ran into?
Yeah, so from there's actually a bunch, but the most prevalent from a development standpoint is the balancing.
Mm.
Um, a lot of roguelikes have like set like the equipment can be randomized, but they always have a set of data.
Mm.
It always does X damage. It increases your walking speed. It does something, and that's all it does. With us, it's kind of like the card changes over time. Like I said, with the
Mm.
stats, we don't know where people are going to go with their stats, so we can't. It's harder to judge how strong a card's going to be later in the game. So figuring out how to balance a system like that, where there technically is no cap to how good a card can be.
Yeah,
So
and it,
how do we balance that? So
I can see that
that
being
was,
an issue too, because having played some of this game for our review, there are some cards that I can see incredible potential if you max your stats out, doing huge amount of damage for next to no energy cost.
exactly, but you have to get there though. You
Right?
do have
Yeah.
to invest that time to get the stats. So we actually created a card rating system, if you will,
Mm.
for everything from monsters to equipment to just general player cards, where we kind of try to set a minimum requirement for certain areas in the game. So like end game, you need at least this X amount of stats to not die instantly. But if you meet that requirement, you should get a good fight out of the enemies
Mm.
because you're kind of at that minimum power level. So we based all those cards around those card rarities, and the rarity kind of goes between like a one cost common, a two cost common, or this rarity, one cost uncommons this rarity, two cost uncommons this rarity. So we kind of built this whole like rating system where all the cards fall within like a set range that is each rarity,
Mm.
essentially cost and rarity. So like I said, it actually worked out really well because all the cards technically have the same potential. It's just depending on what you're looking to do, what kind of build you're going for. Because some cards, so say we have an attack card with a certain effect.
Hmm.
If you're building straight attack, an attack card that has a higher scaling for an attack could be really good. But if you're
Mm.
doing like a status effect build, you can find those status effects cards that actually scale really, really well based off your stats.
Mm. Makes a lot of sense.
So you kind of like I said, all the cards are kind of like set in a set rating system, which is really nice. It took us quite a long time to figure all that math out,
I can
but
imagine.
it seems to be working fairly well, though.
It does, and one of the other things that really has grabbed my attention with the Last Hex kind of plays into the fact that you've put so much time into making sure the core system works. Is it seems very easily for you to add additional content into and kind of create new events, new monsters, other thing. And obviously, this is probably looking a little bit far ahead, considering you haven't hit early access yet. But was that part of your development process? Is kind of like planning for the future?
Yeah, so I mean, with an early access game like this, it's being our first game,
Mm-hmm.
and it's something that we want to have some longevity with. So building systems out that make it easy to, like I said, create cards, create events, equipment, and just drop it in. We that was kind of forefront for
Hmm.
us to make that kind of a system. Um, but beyond that, there's a lot of content that we didn't end up getting to
Mm.
that we're hoping to add in post launch. So like one of the things we were looking that I was actively developing, but we kind of ran out of time was like dungeons,
Oh, cool.
which is like like a couple dungeons per map, and then it brings you to a whole different map, and you kind
Mm.
of go through that small instance. Like you're going through like 6 to 10 different uh, dungeon specific events and monsters for like dungeon specific gear. So
Mm.
think of it kind of like raids,
Yeah, yeah.
like a small raid. It has its own equipment list. It has its own monster list. So giving a little bit more stuff to do in the maps.
Cool. Yeah, you can. Yeah, I can see like all these little points in the way the game works. It's like, oh, I have to imagine they've been thinking ahead, so to speak. Cool. Well, that's cool to get a little bit of insight into kind of how you guys have approached building this game. Like we've said, May 10th for early access on Steam,
Yep.
and we will have a link to that below if any of the footage people are seeing looks interesting. Please check it out. But I'd like to turn to talking a little bit more about kind of your background.
Of course.
So what got you started in the whole indie game development field?
Yeah, so I'm actually a developer by trade. So I've been developing for close to 12 years now. First being advertising, building websites, and things of that nature. Then moving into software development and like museum exhibit development. And then 2 years ago, all of a sudden, like clicked in my head that, oh, I know how to code. Why don't I try making a game? Don't know why it took me 10 years, but so it just, like I said, it just clicked one day. Like I've been playing games for forever, and I don't know why it didn't click until then. So I kind of jumped in and started using Unity. Lots and lots of prototyping, so much prototyping that I just don't want to even mention. There's a lot of really bad things in there. So year of just learning Unity and learning kind of C# and those systems and figuring all of that out, and then working on the Last Hex for the past actually just about a year now, a little over a year now.
Cool. You mentioned kind of the inspiration of like board games, but are there any video games that kind of stand out to you as kind of those moments where you played something and said, "Oh, I want to make stuff like this"?
So yes, but it's a cop out answer, but what game isn't inspirational?
That's a fair answer.
I mean, it's true to some degree, but I mean, I can mention some of my top 5 favorite games.
Yeah.
So like Legend of Dragoon for PS1, I loved the combat system. It was awesome, good story. Then there's Final Fantasy Tactics. Job system, it reminds me of D&D to some degree, where you're just kind of building however you see fit. There's some of that in the Last Hex too, where you're picking a job and you can kind of build it however you want. More recent game is Hellblade. It's such a good story. It's just awesome. It's phenomenal how good that game is. And then of course, one of my favorite games is Binding of Isaac. And it's fun seeing where it started and how far it's come, and how big it's gotten. Not like team wise, but how big the actual game got. There are so many items and so many expansions and so many cool things in there. That it's kind of like a golden standard to some degree for kind of like a roguelike setup.
Sure.
And then another game called Epistory, which it's kind of like it's a typing game that you're just typing to attack things and to build things, and the art is just so fascinating to me, and how the world builds as you play, and it's just kind of really awesome. So those are kind of like my top 5 that I can go back and play like anytime and just like chill out and then just enjoy it.
That's a good list. Cool. Final question we ask every developer that we talk to. Other indie games that have caught your eye, either ones that are in the works, under development, or have released. Just use this as an opportunity to shout out some other indie dev teams.
Yeah, so I actually made 2 lists for this.
Oh, 2 lists.
So yeah. So I did a release games. Binding of Isaac. It doesn't really need to be said, but it's an awesome game.
Yeah.
To the Moon. By Khan, if you know Khan or Shigeharu, who did the music. She's awesome musician. Epistory again, and then an awesome little couch co-op. Not co-op, but it's called Crawl.
Yeah.
It's so good. I don't think a lot of people know about it, but
not enough people know about Crawl. It's fantastic.
Go check it out. It's so good. But as far as the ones that are in development right now that I have been thoroughly enjoying watching, and some of them I have played, Chrono Sword. It's kind of like a pixel, like Dark Souls kind of game, it seems, from the GIFs that he's been posting. One of my favorite games that I've been following, and I'm I'm glad I've gotten to meet this team at a couple cons. One Step from Eden. It's like a what, Battle Networks, like a fast-paced Mega Man Battle Networks kind of a scenario.
It's a super impressive game. It blew me away when I saw it at PAX East this year.
Yeah, it's so good, and the guys that are making it, they're so nice and just so laid back. It's awesome. And then this other one, I don't know if they've been to any cons yet, and I do not know how to pronounce it, unfortunately. So I think it's either ITTA or ITA.
ITA, yeah.
Yeah, and the like the Reddit posts and the Twitter of all the cool gifs that they've been posting is just, they look so phenomenally fun. So those three are definitely the ones I've been really keeping an eye on.
Perfect. That's a great list. I like that. I like that you took the time to separate them into released and in development. That's some good work. Cool. Awesome. Well, Luigi, thank you for taking a little bit of time to talk about the Last Hex with us and give us a little bit of background. Like we said, it's going to be out on Steam Early Access May 10th. Find a link below, and thank you again, and we'll look forward to playing more.
Oh, thank you. Enjoy, guys.